When we talk about the most eagerly anticipated moments in human history, for a lot of people, they might think of the first contact with extraterrestrial life, the second coming of Jesus Christ, or discovering a cure for cancer. All of those would be cool, of course, don't get me wrong, but I know someone to whom one event would trump all of those. That event is this video, and that someone is the man, the myth, the legend, Ryuzaki Tayu. If you have ever ventured down into the deepest, darkest corners of the HITC Sevens comments section, then you will be very familiar with this man. Or woman. Or God, I suppose, as I prefer to view him. On every single one of my last 701 videos, since I last made a video that Ryuzaki requested, he, she, or our Lord and Saviour, has requested the exact same video. The best German players in the Premier League of all time, followed by the ever-increasing, updated day of Ryozaki's request. We recently eclipsed 700. Now, I don't make a video every day. In fact, I haven't done for some time. Sometimes, these days, as the videos have become gradually longer and more research-intensive, I only make 2 or 3 a week. No, Ryozaki's requests, on every single one of my videos, all 701 of them, now dates back to January 2021, a time when Manchester United were top of the Premier League table, Leicester City were third, and Cole Palmer still hadn't made his Premier League debut. That is almost 4 years ago, and the first time that Ryuzaki ever suggested it, outside of his streak of over 700 successive requests, was over 4.5 years ago. Sometimes, I have to check the comments section for Ryozaki's request, just to make sure that I'm still alive. If it's not there, I would have to assume that there had been a nuclear holocaust, or an asteroid the size of Mars had collided with Earth and destroyed it. But it is there. It's always there. A rock of eternal comfort and reassurance in an otherwise increasingly volatile world. Friends can come and go, lovers won't necessarily always be there, but Ryuzaki will. Rest assured, Ryuzaki will. It is at this point that I must concede that there is a reason why it has taken me almost 4 years to make this video, despite the most relentless lobbying campaign outside of APAC. There haven't been that many amazing German players in the Premier League, not compared to French or Spanish players, for example, and I have never made videos about the 7 best French or Spanish Premier League players, as far as I'm aware. The best German players tend to stay in the Bundesliga, a bit like English players do in the Premier League, and, invariably, the very best tend to end up at Bayern Munich, where they feel little incentive to leave. I also didn't, and still don't think that many people will watch it, partly for that reason. I'd initially hoped, therefore, that Ryuzaki would simply forget about it and move on. I couldn't have been any more wrong, and anyone watching every single one of my videos for 4 years straight, let alone requesting the exact same video in the comments on each of them, surely, eventually, deserves some recognition. So, Ryuzaki, congratulations. Much like coalition forces did to the French at Waterloo in 1815, you finally worn me down. And now, like Napoleon, I've little doubt that I will be exiled to the remote island of St. Helena to live out the rest of my days in an 18th century mansion. Before I begin, I should state that the criteria is the best German players in the Premier League, not the best German players to have played in the Premier League. That might sound like a minor distinction, but the likes of Jerome Boateng, Bastian Schweinsteiger, Serge Gnabry, Niklas Füllkrug, and Lukas Podolski are, or were, all fantastic German footballers, without necessarily being fantastic Premier League players, albeit it is early days for Füllkrug just yet. It's not just talent that matters, therefore, nor is it merely Premier League peak. Quality and quantity of appearances in English football's top flight are both taken into account. Right, without further ado, who is neither German nor did he ever play in the Premier League, so Ryuzaki would have every right to feel miffed if he waited 4 years for this video and then I included him. Here are the 7 best German players of the Premier League era. 7th, Leroy Sané. There are a few Germans whose time in the Premier League was both short and sweet. Chief among them are Antonio Rudiger, Michael Ballack, Leroy Sané, and Jurgen Klinsmann. Because of how much more football everyone who features ahead of them played in the Premier League, out of that esteemed quartet, I could only really pick one. Rudiger made the most Premier League appearances, 133 in total over 5 seasons at Chelsea, during which time he won the Champions League and the Europa League before departing for Real Madrid. Michael Ballack was the best of the four, and both the best German to play in the Premier League, and one of the 10 or maybe 15 greatest German footballers of all time in my opinion. And although his time at Chelsea wasn't his peak, he remained a class act in an outstanding midfield for 4 seasons at Stamford Bridge when fit. And finally, Jurgen Klinsmann had by far the shortest stay out of the 4 of them in the Premier League, just 1.5 seasons across 2 separate stints at Tottenham Hotspur. But he was as good as any German player has ever been in the Premier League, scoring 29 goals in 56 games, keeping Tottenham in the Premier League in his second stint, after which he retired. It was a tough call then, and all would be worthy inclusions, but Leroy Sané enjoyed 3 sensational seasons in the Premier League, which is twice as long as Klinsmann. He played what is, to date at least, the best football of his career here, unlike Ballack. He is more talented, I think, than Antonio Rudiger, and unlike all 3 of his rivals, he managed to win the Premier League twice. Sané is one of very few Germans to have enjoyed a genuinely awe-inspiring season in the Premier League, namely the 2017-18 season, his second at the Etihad, in which he scored 10 goals and made 15 assists in only 32 Premier League appearances. Sané averaged a goal contribution once every 96 minutes, deservedly winning the PFA Young Player of the Year award, and he backed it up by hitting double figures for both goals and assists in even fewer games, and with an even better goal contribution per minute ratio the following season, lifting a second successive Premier League title. If Sané had stuck around at Man City under Guardiola, he could have become the greatest German Premier League player of all time, but it wasn't to be. Pep didn't take kindly to Sané's attitude towards the end of his time at the Etihad, it has been reported, and as soon as he started to look admiringly at Bayern Munich, and that admiration was reciprocated by the Bavarians, Manchester City sold him back to the Bundesliga for a potential £46.5 million. No one who has made fewer than Sané's 90 Premier League appearances features in this 7, but there's also almost no one in this list who reached the heights that he did between 2017 and 2019. 6th, Pascal Groß. It took me so long to make Riyazaki's video idea that Match of the Day Top 10s, a BBC podcast presented by Gary Lineker, Alan Shearer and Micah Richards, clearly stole it from my comments section and beat me to the punch. I suppose I've only got myself to blame. I did have 4 years. I listened to that podcast after finalising my own 7 so that it wouldn't prejudice my judgment at all, and I was amazed that Pascal Groß didn't even make their list of candidates for their top 10 lists, meanwhile the likes of Lucas Podolski and Antonio Rudiger did. Make no mistake, Lucas Podolski is a better footballer who had a far better career than Pascal Groß. He is Germany's 4th highest appearance holder and 3rd highest goal scorer of all time. But his time in the Premier League was a bit of a damp squib. For all of the anticipation, as had been the case at Bayern Munich, Arsenal failed to get the best out of Podolski and his cannonball of a left boot. Podolski made a grand total of just 60 Premier League appearances, scoring only 19 goals and making 11 assists, predominantly from the left flank. Pascal Groß, by comparison, made a whopping 238 Premier League appearances, almost 4 times as many as Podolski, and the 3rd most of any German, scoring 30 goals and making 45 assists, which is the 2nd most of any German, while playing, well, everywhere. Throughout his time at Brighton, I felt like Groß was probably the most underrated player in the Premier League, and I suppose I should thank the Match of the Day Top 10s boys for somewhat proving my point. There is no world in which Lucas Podolski had a better Premier League career than Pascal Groß, and you could make a pretty legitimate argument, in my view, for him finishing as high as 3rd, or maybe even 2nd in this 7. Perhaps I am even falling victim to the pandemic of grossly underrating the talents of Pascal Groß myself. Signed by Brighton for £3 million from Ingolstadt following their 2017 promotion to the Premier League, Groß seemed to fit seamlessly into English football's top flight, immediately becoming a talismanic figure at the Amex. while those around him, whether it be Leandro Trossard, Alexis McAllister or Moises Caicedo, were plucked off for huge fees by superclubs, Groß never seemed to attract that kind of interest, perhaps due to his age, despite arguably being Brighton's most important and consistent player throughout that time. When he finally departed for Borussia Dortmund in the summer, age 33, following 7 years of service to the Seagulls, Tony Bloom rightly hailed him as a true Brighton legend. Fittingly, in his final season, only Bruno Fernandes created more chances in the Premier League, and he is Brighton's record goalscorer in the Premier League as well. But apparently Lucas Podolski deserves a spot in a Premier League German's top 10 ahead of him. Sorry. I will let it go. It's not that big of a deal, is it? It's just a bit ridiculous. That's all I'm saying. I mean, there's no comparison between them really, is there? Alright, I'll move on. 5th, Mesut Özil. The hardest player to rank in this 7, I have made a whole video about Mesut Ozil's complicated legacy at Arsenal, which was 20 minutes long, so I'm not even going to try and fully unpack it in the short time that we have now. At his best, Özil was arguably the best German player that the Premier League has ever seen, and among the finest playmakers in modern football. Hey look, it's Pascal Groß. Nicknamed the assist king at Werder Bremen, only Lionel Messi and Kevin De Bruyne have a better minutes per assist record than Özil since the turn of the millennium, and at one time, before his premature downfall, he was top of the tree. Like KSI and the Unabomber though, Özil has always divided opinion. To some, he was a technical marvel and a creative genius, whose strengths and weaknesses just needed to be properly understood and accommodated. To others, he was a luxury player, accused of being lazy, lackadaisical, and at times disinterested. I say, why not both? I suppose, unlike with KSI or the Unabomber, where I come down firmly on one side of the argument, I am an Özil centrist. Unlike Özil himself, of course, who is a staunch supporter of the hard-right AKP in Turkey, and President Erdogan, who was the best man at his wedding in 2019. I digress. Mesut Özil ranks 6th in the Premier League's all-time appearance charts among Germans, having played 184 league games at Arsenal, and of course, he is top of the tree among Germans in terms of assists. A €50 million marquee signing for Arsenal from Real Madrid in 2013, Özil scored 5 goals and made 9 assists in 26 league games in his debut campaign, one which would end with him lifting the World Cup in Brazil. His second season was blighted by injuries, but in his third, Özil scored 6 goals and made a mesmerising 19 assists. By New Year's Day, Özil already had 16 assists, averaging almost an assist a game, and on course to absolutely obliterate the Premier League's record of 20 assists in a season, now jointly held by Thierry Henry and Kevin De Bruyne. Unfortunately, he only added 3 assists throughout the second half of the season, and in some ways, that sort of sums up the consistency or inconsistency problems that Özil had at Arsenal, which only got worse as time went on. At his best, Özil was a top 3 German player in the Premier League, and you could even argue that he was the top 1. Factor in that he ranks 6th in terms of appearances, was a star man for a Big Six club for at least 4 seasons, and won an Arsenal Player of the Season award, and for all of his flaws, inconsistencies, and premature downfall, Özil has to feature in this 7. 4th, Robert Huth. There is no world in which Robert Huth is a better footballer than Mesut Özil, unless there is a world out there in which football is actually boxing. And even then, Özil has beefed up since hanging up his boots, while Huth has become a pretty lean running machine, running marathons in his free time in Berlin. There is a world, however, where I think Robert Huth is a better Premier League player with a greater Premier League legacy than Mesut Özil, and that world, well, it's this world. For a start, Huth won 3 Premier League titles, which is the second most of any German, and whilst he is best associated with Leicester City's fairy tale title-winning campaign, he was an important squad player in Chelsea's back-to-back league titles under Jose Mourinho. For 3 straight seasons, Huth hit double figures in terms of Premier League appearances at Stamford Bridge, as the club's 4th-choice centre-back behind John Terry, Ricardo Carvalho, and William Gallas. Next up it was Middlesbrough, where Huth had to bounce back from multiple injuries before joining Stoke City after Borough were relegated. The type of centre-back that Tony Pulis has wet dreams about. if that's not too evocative of an image. Huth made almost 200 appearances at the Britannia, winning the club's Player of the Year award at a time in which the Potters were lauded for their defensive resilience. In the 2010-11 season, Huth was even Stoke's second highest scorer in the league and in all competitions, with 6 and 9 goals respectively. Then came the most remarkable swan song of all, at Leicester City, where Huth partnered Wes Morgan in an extremely experienced centre-back pairing, but one that few people anticipated would lift the Premier League title. Huth is the leading German appearance holder in the Premier League, having played 322 matches in total, which is more than the likes of Harry Kane and Peter Schmeichel. And, fun fact, he is also the only senior German international, capped 19 times, who never played in the Bundesliga. I think on sheer appearances, legacy and accomplishments, you could make a case for him finishing second or even first, but by the same token, he was a mid-table player for most of his Premier League career. He wasn't as talented as others who feature, and that has to be somewhat taken into account, so fourth feels just about right. Third, Jens Lehmann. A brilliant goalkeeper who had the misfortune of being born in the same year as Oliver Kahn, one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time, with whom he would develop a famous rivalry. It speaks volumes about Jens Lehmann's talents and persistence that in spite of that, he still won over 60 caps for Germany between 1998 and 2008. At club level, Lehmann made his name with Schalke, where he played over 300 games and won the UEFA Cup. He struggled for games in a 6-month stint at AC Milan before lifting the Bundesliga title and reaching another UEFA Cup final with Borussia Dortmund. Arsene Wenger signed Lehmann for just £1.5 million in the summer of 2003 as a replacement for the retiring David Seaman, which ought not to have been an easy task. Lehmann made it look very easy though, as in his debut campaign, Arsenal went invincible, they lifted the Premier League title, and they only conceded 26 goals. The Gunners had the best defensive record in the division, and Lehmann kept more clean sheets than anyone else. In total, Lehmann had 4 rock-solid seasons in North London, racking up 147 Premier League appearances in total, and that is enough to make him the first German on our podium. Second, Dietmar Hamann. He might not have been the flashiest of footballers, but by the criteria laid out, namely the quality and quantity of Premier League appearances, Didi Hamann, or Hamann as the English prefer to call him, is comfortably among the best Germans that the Premier League has ever seen. Unusual among regular German internationals, especially at the time, Hamann spent the bulk of his career in England, which consisted of 1 season at Newcastle United, 7 at Liverpool, 3 at Manchester City, and finally, after coming out of retirement, 1 in League One with MK Dons. The rest were all in the Premier League, where Hamann played 268 times, putting him second to only Robert Huth among Germans. Freakishly consistent, Hamann was a clever and often underrated midfield sitter, a master of the tactical foul, and capable of scoring the very occasional thunderbolt. It was famously Hamann's introduction at half-time against AC Milan in the 2005 Champions League final, in which Liverpool were trailing 3-0, that turned the game on its head, putting some shackles on Kaká, who had the freedom of the park in the first half, and allowing Steven Gerrard and Xabi Alonso to start to impact the game further forward. That was one of 9 trophies that Hamann won at Anfield, none of which were the Premier League, of course, where the closest he ever came was second in the 2001-02 season. It is a shame, given his contribution and success on Merseyside, that Hamann's outspoken comments as a pundit led to Jurgen Klopp speaking in rather disparaging terms about him, and Liverpool fans almost feeling obliged to take a side. Klopp is unlikely to lose many battles for the hearts and minds of Liverpool fans, and this was certainly no exception. Hamann doesn't help himself at times, to put it mildly, but whatever you make of his post-playing days comments, while he was on the pitch, he was at least a 7 out of 10 every week, he was a brilliant shield for a back 4, and he is about as good as it gets in terms of German players in the Premier League. First, Nick Proschwitz. Up there with Gerd Müller and Miroslav Klose, when we talk about the greatest German centre-forwards of all time, Nick Proschwitz may only have played 4 games in the Premier League for Hull City, and failed to score a single goal, but his impact before going out on loan to Barnsley midway through the 2013-14 season was quite frankly unforgettable. Nah, I'm only kidding. What am I like? I wouldn't do that to you, Ryazaki. The rest of you, sure, but not you, Ryazaki. First, Ilkay Gündoğan. A little bit out of sorts in an extremely out of sorts Manchester City team right now, Ilkay Gündoğan hasn't yet had a fairy tale return to the Etihad, but his Premier League career overall guarantees him a spot in first. Always an enormous talent, Gündoğan was sidelined for an enormous 14 months at Borussia Dortmund with a spine injury, which multiple specialists were unable to diagnose and therefore unable to treat. Gündoğan reportedly contemplated retiring from football, but he returned, joining Man City in 2016, where he soon suffered another devastating setback when he tore the cruciate ligaments in his knee. It is a mark of Gündoğan's resilience, as much as his talent therefore, that he managed to bounce back from both of those serious injuries, to carve out not just a decent career, but to become one of the best midfielders in the world, a talismanic figure at the best team in Europe, and a relentless winner. A complete all-rounder, Gündoğan is a rare breed of midfielder who looks as comfortable sitting deep as a playmaker as he does operating as a goal-scoring and high-chance-creating number 10. He even deputised as a false 9 in the 2020-21 season when Manchester City were without a centre-forward. And guess what? He was only brilliant at that as well, scoring 17 goals that season. In 7 years at the Etihad, Gündoğan won 5 Premier League titles, 2 FA Cups, 4 League Cups, and he captained them to a first ever Champions League crown in 2023. Not only incredibly gifted, versatile, and dependable, Gündoğan also developed a remarkable ability to produce when it mattered most. In a Man City team that had a frustrating habit, from the perspective of their rivals, to peak at just the right moment, whenever they needed a moment of inspiration, Gündoğan was often the man to provide it. There were his braces against both Leeds United and Everton during the 2022-23 season Premier League run-in, yet another brace to win Man City the FA Cup final, and consequently the treble, against rivals Manchester United, and his late winner against Aston Villa that won the Citizens the 2021-22 Premier League title. All in all then, Gündoğan combines longevity, talent and accomplishments to make him the outstanding candidate as the greatest German player of the Premier League era, even ahead of Nick Proschwitz. I'd still put him behind fellow Man City legend Bert Trautmann if we were talking about the entire history of English football though. Well, I suppose that is it for today's video. Honourable mentions go to Bernd Leno, Per Mertesacker, Kai Havertz, Antonio Rudiger, Thomas Hitzelsberger, Stefan Freund, Michael Ballack, Yuri Rosler, Timo Werner, Jurgen Klinsmann, and, yes, I suppose, Lucas Podolski. See Match of the Day Top 10s? This is the point at which Podolski should enter the conversation. And a much more special mention, of course, goes to Ryazaki Tayu. More reliable than Park Ji-sung, more persistent than Japanese knotweed, and far more beloved than Father Christmas. I eagerly await your next idea, Ryazaki, and who knows, maybe to actually make it in 4 years' time. Don't ever change. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much to those of you who have watched. You know, maybe it will surprise me and do better than anticipated, and I'll have to take Ryazaki's ideas more often, you know, we'll see. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course make sure that you are subscribed, and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potts Harmer, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might fancy watching after this one. If I remember, I'll try to put Ryazaki's other suggested video idea on there, but I might forget. It has been known to happen. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky now. On the first 3 via the username at HITC Sevens, the other one, Alfie Potts Harmer. Yeah, as I say, and all of those links should be down in the video description below. Cheers. Have a great day. Especially you, Ryazaki.